Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services.
Get to know what's right and wrong, I suppose. Get to form your first decent relationships with your mates. Get to do things like you feel a bit of autonomy, like a bit of independence. Get to make some mistakes and hopefully not do anything too drastic that winds you up in bother, but that you can learn from. Now that I live kind of close to where I used to grow up, I'd take Michelle, my partner, would go on long walks like you do in COVID, and you'd say, that's where I used to go when I was 7 or 8 or 9, or I'd get my BMX around here and we'd do that. I do look back on those days fondly, to be honest with you. I've always felt a little bit, I talk about it a bit in the book, I've always felt a little bit like I don't particularly fit into any hole. So when I was, I grew up, I went to a little primary school around the corner in Strand on the Green, and then I got a scholarship to go to a private school for junior school, and I didn't really enjoy it, and I left there after I was sort of 12 or 13. I went to a big comprehensive in South London, even though I was living in West London, and I'd get a bus and a train and a bus to get there because they played rugby and there weren't many comprehensives in London that did that. And then we had a private house on our road, but it was the only private house on the road. The rest were all council houses, and we were next to a council block. So it was kind of like, you're a posh kid, you're not a posh kid, you're a posh kid, you're not a posh kid. For a couple of years, I'd be cycling back home from Ealing, where the private school was, with a bright green blazer and bright orange hair. And, I certainly got a bit of abuse from some of the local lads, that they certainly saw me as something different. And it's hard to kind of try to have a proper coherent argument with people to tell them, but my parents aren't paying for this education, and I know it's got this posh stuff, but I actually, you can't really do that except just cycle a bit faster to get out of bother, really. And so that's the same that continued, really. When I went to uni, I went to Loughborough, which was a real nice mix, and then to Cambridge, which obviously has got it's also got a really nice mix. And a lot of my mates actually at Cambridge came from working class northern backgrounds and comprehensive background. So I actually saw a lot of life at Cambridge. We had a nice place in Brentford and a nice big garden where I'd spend all my time, really. And it was a bit like me, you would see someone doing something on telly, football, you'd be watching FA Cup final or something, or snooker, and then you want to recreate it. You spend all day in the garden, kicking a ball around, pretending you were whoever you just watched on telly. Yeah, I did a lot of fantasizing, but definitely a lot of play around that, kind of just, like putting yourself in a different world, like thinking different things.
Surely it's about what you just described there, and about the space to find out, and the space to dream, and the space to play, because there's too much restriction on that, whether it's in school and the curriculum or whether it's hierarchies. I just find that there's a lot of structure around that, and that maybe we, a little bit more freedom to make some innocent mistakes would benefit a lot more people, especially in terms of mental health.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my mum and dad, I was really lucky that they really did give me a lot of flexibility. So they, and I guess maybe that was the time as well, that no one was bothered if you left the house in the morning and didn't come back till it was dark. They weren't going to, there was no phones to find out where you were. We just rocked up and you knew when tea time was, and that was about it. And kind of as I got older, that continued, really. And so it does mean that you do some stupid things and make some mistakes, particularly, I was growing up going to school in South London, and just you fall in with some wrong people and some right people. And a big comprehensive, you have lots of interesting mates that you sometimes take you down little alleyways that you shouldn't go down, really. But it's all about making sure that hopefully the penny drops in time before you do anything too stupid.
Well, one thing that hasn't come up too much is your experience at St Edward's School. I was, reading that. What was the start in 6 years? You had a player in every England setup from 16s to senior. That's impressive early success. Did you, when you came into that role, did you feel like? I mean, was there confidence there? Did you, or were you being free and creative and playing in that role?
Yeah, I was kind of I set up a PE department. So I'd gone from playing professional rugby, having an injury, having to be a supply teacher in inner London. So I was, and also I was at Raheem's old school in Wembley and by IKEA. And I ended up in a school in Southall that was 2,500 kids. So third biggest comprehensive in London. Really talented kids. A lot of tough kids, but I really enjoyed my time there. And I probably would have stayed there if I could have stayed there. But I got asked to go to this big boarding school, completely opposite, Richard Branson's kids. And Emilia Clarke, who's in Game of Thrones, I used to teach her as well. But I was head of PE because there was no one else. There was an PE teacher. So I was left kind of to myself. And actually, for the first couple of years, I could concentrate on just doing my thing creatively and coaching. And I actually taught art in those first 2 years as well. I'd only done art history A-level, and I only chose that because it was my third A-level. Couldn't really think of anything else to do. And the teacher that taught us had never failed. No one had failed it. So I thought, well, this could be all right. And he used to take off most of the big horse races. He would not be around for. He would be somewhere else watching the horse racing. And he would have just told us, keep quiet, don't tell anyone. And off he'd go. And so, Ascot and Epsom, when he would have a week off. But he actually weirdly, like out of everything that I've ever studied, I've hung on to a lot of stuff he taught me. And so I was kind of doing a lot of creative stuff in my first couple of years in St Edward's, and I had a Scottish headmaster that as long as the team were doing well and everyone was behaving themselves, he was happy for me to go and do my own thing. And it got the best out of me as a young coach, really, just being allowed to express myself.
So now the dots join, you see, because having read the Fiji story and the England stuff, which is very well documented for good reason. I was itching to know what were the formative steps, and again, it just chimes with everything I believe about creativity and that freedom to find out what we've hit upon. So that's wonderful. That's wonderful to know that you were kind of given something of a blank canvas to do that in, and it just goes to show, when people are given the trust and given the backing, that great things can happen.
Yeah, that's happened on a number of occasions, really, with me. It did it as a school teacher. It did with Fiji, because we'll come to that. But and with England at the start, it did, because I took over a sevens program. I won't get into bore you too much, but basically, I just couldn't access the players that the team used to be able to access. So I had to think creatively about how to do stuff, and I was on to a hide into nothing really at the start. So my bosses kind of just let me get on with it. As long as I didn't spend what budget they gave me, they let me do whatever I wanted to, really. And before that, I'd been at a club where exactly the same. They had just avoided relegation. They were in the third tier, and they had let me crack on with stuff as well. And as long as you kind of let people know what you're doing, and you manage well, which I kind of have done badly and done well, in England, I didn't particularly up-manage well at all to my bosses. I always thought it was their job to manage me and tell me what my KPIs are and when I'd get reviewed and stuff. But up-managing is a two-way process for sure. And I did that really well with Fiji because I had a military dictator and a convicted murderer as my two bosses. So I had to up-manage well. So as long as you kind of set your stall out and you keep people informed and you don't give too many people above you curveballs that will embarrass them or then I think, you can be allowed when you start your journey to just go and do your own thing.
You said something that was, I thought was wonderful, and you referred to it as blind spots, materialism and the things that I guess, I kind of picked three things in that vein. As I put status, materialism, and the idea of success. I find these are consistently, and this isn't just in sport, but I find they are consistent diversions. Well, blind spots. That's the best way I've heard it put, because of what they lead us away from just finding our happiness. Is that something you agree with?
100%. and that, I think kind of wrapped around all of that is ego. So the big blind spot. You don't want to like look like you're not as good as somebody else, or you don't want to be shown up publicly, or you don't want to lose an argument. And all of these things, I think, especially in coaching and elite sport, it's quite a macho environment, and so you're constantly wanting to keep if you're not careful, your ego just takes control, and you look back at it and think the decisions are being made by somebody else. That's your ego, not you. And it's only when kind of experience comes in, you start to be a bit more confident about what you're good at, that ego can disappear, and you go, no, do you know what? I'm here to learn. I know what I can do, and that's going to make me a better person. But I've had to always keep it in check, to be honest with you, because it's really easy for it to just run away. And in my time with England and then going to Fiji, where kind of Fiji taught me to just stick to the basics and enjoy the simple life, and the material was easy to get rid of in Fiji because it was replaced by happiness, people laughing, sunshine, the basics, living in the present, because you're never really sure. Even if you're in Fiji and you've got a few quid, the supermarket probably hasn't got very much in it. You might get a cyclone. You probably get a power cut every week. And you just live in the present and appreciate the good things in life. But then I bounced back from there to work a bit in New York, and now I'm in London. And before you know it, that 3 years that I had in Fiji of understanding all of that gets unraveled pretty quickly if you're going back to first world and all of that stuff. So I keep things in check. I have a tattoo that's just here on my wrist that says Vela Mani, and Vela Mani was the only value really that we had in Fiji, which the team had, which is work together, love each other. And I just keep look up, if I'm feeling stressed or I'm getting angry about something that I've seen, I'll just look at that and remind myself as a physical cue, mate, just take a breath.
There's something you said. You play rugby to express the way you feel, to burst free of the prosaic constraints of everyday life. So something from your book. I've grown up sport obsessed. I played very briefly county level rugby league for Yorkshire, and but then I've always followed the enjoyment. So I wasn't loving rugby league at that point. Went to football, less than average ability at football. Got to 16 and thought, well, I'd better start drawing footballers now, because it's the only other good thing I'm good at. But I've never seen much difference between a pitch and a canvas. That sounds really cheesy, but I'd like to hear just a little bit of elaboration on that about expressive rugby. And it sounds like something that's a reason, like you parted company with England, that other things had stopped that from being a thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. One is when you were a player, and two is when now I'm a coach on the other side of it. And yeah, I guess it goes back to those times where I'm imagining I'm whoever I am, playing for Man United in the FA Cup final, back in my garden in Brentford, and you're doing stuff, you're trying stuff, you're watching someone do a cross step over or a goose step in rugby, and you want to practice it and do it because it's fun. And it was why I played sports, for that enjoy. I wanted to win things, but I'd rather enjoy it. And then I think when I've gone into professional sport, often that gets sucked out of you. The amount of times that I'll hear, I don't even Brentford, when we lost on Sunday against Barnsley, the manager said, "Oh, we've had a bad day at the office." And it's like, please don't ever make the pitch feel like it's an office, because that's the last thing it should be. It should be a canvas. It certainly shouldn't be an office or a factory. And I think we can easily get into that. And I know I've been in organisations where it's meeting after meeting after meeting. It's 3 hours analysing a game that only lasted an hour, and you're like, why aren't you letting these players like express themselves within a really simple framework? And I think one of the issues that we have as coaches is that those star players, those mavericks that like to do different things and express themselves, often like this, they get mistreated by the coaches because they don't stick to what they're supposed to be doing, et cetera. But actually, I think it's because deep down as coaches, we know those players know more than us, and and it's allowing them that and checking your ego, going, do you know what? This kid can do things that I can't even dream of doing or of thinking. Let them get on with it, and give them some guardrails around their their day-to-day that can help them achieve that, but don't suffocate them. And professional sport can do that.
Let's talk about instincts. I mean, this takes us to the sort of the decision, wild decision to. It was a tweet, right? The tweet that came up for the job.
Yeah, so I'd left England and I'd kind of been offered a job with UK Sport as kind of strategic back of house stuff, so away from the fields and training grounds. And I didn't really feel like that was exciting. And then a mate said on Twitter, yeah, Fiji are looking for a new head coach. You fancy it? And yeah, I'd never been to Fiji, but I'd played against them and I'd coached a couple of boys that were Fijian. So something in me thought, I've got to at least find out where this is going to take me. So I sent my CV in. Well, I didn't really have a CV. I kind of put a few lines in. They said, look, we know you are. You've missed our deadline, but let's have an interview at 2 a.m, I think it was, in Suva, which was middle of the night in London. Downed a couple of espressos, stuck a tie on for the first time since I left school, and waited a couple of hours for them actually to come online, because in Fiji, time is perhaps not a primary urge for anyone. And Fiji time is like no hurry, no worry, right? And if someone doesn't turn up for a meeting, it probably wasn't that important anyway. And they turn up 2 hours later and they smash the Skype out to project it onto the back wall of the CEO's office. And they asked me lots of questions like, do I know Johnny Wilkinson? Have I met the Queen? And things like that. I stayed awake and I thought, okay, that's a triumph in itself. And then the next morning, I just went on the internet just to find out a bit more about Fiji. And the guy that interviewed me, the CEO, had been sacked straight after my interview. So I thought that was it then, really. And then 2 weeks later, I get a phone call and we're out having dinner in Richmond, and it was a Fijian number, and they just said, Bulla Ben, this is Berlin Kafoa. I'm the new acting chief executive of the Fijian Rugby Union. We've got a press conference here in Fiji in 20 minutes. I said, oh, that's great, Berlin. What's it about? He said, it's to appoint you as the new head coach of the Fiji national team. So I said, all right, do I have any say in this? And he said, yeah, you've got 20 minutes. So I put the phone down, and if I'd been really English about it and I'd been given 24 hours, I would have got a sheet of paper out, worked out the pros and cons, had my questions ready for him in a follow-up phone call about how much was I going to get paid, how long was the contract for, where would I be living, who's left from the team, who are my bosses. But I didn't have any of that information. I only had 20 minutes, and I knew I needed to do something different. I had become a pretty average version of me, really, as far as I'd lost my sharpness. I'd lost the why I was doing what I was doing as a coach, which kind of threads back to when I was a teacher, which is try and help people become their best version. And so I picked up the phone and said, all right, I'm in. And they said, great, if you can fly to Fiji. And I think it was about a week later, but pay for your flights, we'll pay you back. That never ever happened. And then I turned up about, however many days later in Fiji, and, and was met by, so many different curveballs. It was hard to count them all really in those first 48 hours. The following day, actually, when I had accepted the job, the following day, that night, I kind of got swept up in it a little bit, and, had a couple more glasses of wine and just got a bit kind of starry-eyed about it without really thinking about what I just agreed to. Following morning, I was really felt pretty sick with nervousness and worry, and wanted to get out of it, and rang my agent, and he's like, no, mate, it's over the press. You can't suddenly back out now. You got to go over there. And so when I got over there, I was already nervous. I hadn't been to Fiji. It was a long way, kind of get jet lag, then get jet lag on jet lag. And I got there thinking I was knackered, opened those doors, and you get that, that feeling you got sometimes when you were a kid. Although it was a while since I was on a plane as a kid, but when you first time you go out and it's a nice hot wave of air hits you when you come off the plane. And I was met then by the TV and media for the next 3 hours, and then bounced across on a quick flight to the capital, 26-minute flight to Suva, where the government met me, and we had a big kind of feast in Fijian with Fijian food and fish head soup and stuff like that. And I couldn't keep my head off hitting the fish bowl really, and I went to bed, and I just sat on the bed. I remember going, shit, what have I let myself in for? Thinking I'm in a world where I'm so out of my depth here. The next morning, I open the window and I see the blue sea and I see the blue sky, and I start to go to places where everyone's just nice and happy and laughing, and that puts you at ease a little bit, but then I start to find out that they had got no money, so they'd gone bankrupt. They were being investigated by World Rugby for corruption, so they'd suspended any funding from the governing body. All the players that could go overseas to earn money have gone overseas. There was no training base. That my boss was the military dictator of the country, Frank Bainimarama, who had 2 coups, and his second coup he took over. And if you're head of the country, however you get there, you're also head of the Fijian Rugby Union. So he is my boss. And then eventually he put his brother-in-law in charge of me as chairman. He had gone to prison for 12-year sentence for kicking and punching someone to death at a wedding. And 2 weeks into his prison sentence, his brother-in-law, the dictator, had decided that he had, fully rehabilitated and could be released from prison on full naval pay. He's in the Navy. And he became my boss and also head of the prison service in Fiji, which kind of summed up sometimes the politics around Fiji. And so that was my first, and then my star player his legs had been cursed by a black magic curse that meant he couldn't stand up for 2 days, which again wasn't something that any of the boys at Twickenham used as an excuse not to be able to play. So yeah, I guess that all of those things were happening. So I thought, don't make any stupid decisions. Just listen. Try to take in as much information as you can until you get to a point where then you decide on the pace and risk of the decisions you are going to make. And secondly, I had about 3 training sessions with this team that were really unfit. That I could see that they were really talented, but they just had no foundations. No one had told them how to eat properly. There was no discipline protocols, no timing for when you turn up at training. No encouragement. They didn't ever get feedback. In Fijian society, it's rude to have an argument. So if anyone ever got dropped from the team, they would just find out in the newspaper. So you'd never know how to get any better. So you're demotivated. But you could see glimpses of stuff that I'd never seen English players do. And I was thinking, crikey, if I can get this lot doing this on a bit more regular basis. And they were so thankful and grateful I was there. And I walked off my first training session having laughed the most I'd laughed in years. I thought that forget about all the other stuff that's going on. I'm here. I know why I'm here now. But every single training session, without exception, was almost a spiritual feeling. Really, there was the way they approach the game, the way they approach sport. It's got to be fun, and they approach the sport like they approach life, because you never know in Fiji or in any third world country what's going to happen tomorrow. So they live in the present. And that's great as far as playing the game. They'll chuck the wildest of passes because that's what feels right at the time. That's their instinct, and because they do that a lot, everybody knows kind of what's going on. It's not good, I guess, if you're living in the present and you're at a hotel in Dubai on tour and there's a buffet, because that buffet goes very quickly because they're not sure if that buffet is going to be there tomorrow when they turn up for breakfast. And one beer was never an option with the boys. I could never go for one beer with them. So I never had a drink with any of the players in the entire time I was there. But we had probably more fun than I've ever had.
I think you said it yourself, that you can't turn up with a Western mentality to a South Pacific island.
No, like I think I've said it in the book, something like, I was using a laptop as an oar and paddling up the wrong way. If I'd tried to do it as a Westerner, I had to adapt to the culture. And it's kind of like, I use the analogy a lot, like when you get to a new job, it's a bit like picking up your bags, or use the analogy of carousel. There's certain bags that you've got that you're always going to have, that are your kind of fundamentals that you're going to keep. There's other ones that you're going to need to have new bags as well, and then there's other bags that you need to leave behind. And so when you go into a new culture, that's your decisions you kind of make. What stuff are you going to keep that you've done before? What other stuff are you going to learn, and what other stuff isn't appropriate and you get rid of? For us, winning the Olympic gold medal was not about those 3 days or 2 weeks at the Olympics in Rio. It was about what we had done previously. It was about those, taking those boat trips to those outlying islands and sleeping in villages and meeting uncles of players and having conversations and leading to consistent behaviours then for those next 2 or 3 years, where everyone clearly knew what was required, a clear black and white. But I always talk about it like you have a box which is your guardrails. So if I'm working with you, Ben, we've agreed what our guardrails are, whether that's, a deadline for when the work's been done, what your roles are, what you want out of me, what the timings are, and then we agree them. And it doesn't just come from me as the boss; it comes from all of us, so that they're collectively agreed. Therefore, they're stronger. Because we've all agreed them. But inside that box, I'm just creating psychological safety where I want everybody to be their best version. And that means give them autonomy, give them belief and purpose, recognize their achievements, give them status, and give them really safe, secure conversations so that when someone wants to talk to you about a concern, I'm not going to put a big black cross by their name thinking, they're not the right person. I don't like someone that contradicts or says something against me. And if you can get those two things going, then I think that's, you're on your way to achieving what you want to.
But you see micromanagement, and you see people coming in and doing the opposite of what you described in terms of coming and just listening and understanding the culture. It's almost, I'm here on the strength of my big job title from that other agency, and I'm going to completely change this culture, and everyone thinks you're a dick,
Yeah.
Which is what happens. And it doesn't mean the person is a dick. It's just almost that they haven't respected what was already there.
Yeah, see it a lot. I mean, I work across all different sports at different levels and in corporate as well. And I've got a couple of startups, and it's all exactly as you say. The mistakes happen when someone comes in with predetermined beliefs, or doesn't listen to people, or doesn't actually put psychological safety as a real priority for creating the right environment, allowing people to have, as soon as you take away my autonomy, as soon as I feel like I've got no say in any of this. And that happened for me when I was a young coach, right? And I always would say, when you start your journey, and whatever that is, whatever your career is, if you have a mode of transport to signify that, for me, it's my rusty BMX that squeaks a lot, doesn't go very fast, hasn't got any gears, but I can control it. And if I do hit something when I'm cycling, next time I'll probably understand how to maybe negotiate it, but I'm in control. And as you get into higher jobs, you develop and evolve in the bigger organizations, that mode of transport changes. And when I went to Twickenham, that became a really big juggernaut that goes really fast in one direction, hard to change. You're not at the front, you're certainly not driving it, you're at the back somewhere with an obscured view, and you lose your autonomy. And as soon as I lose autonomy in a job, I'm out of there. I'm gone. You're not going to get the best out of me if I don't feel I'm contributing. And it's a corny saying, but that NASA saying where they asked the cleaner, what his job was, and he said it's to put a man on the moon. It's when you get that connection in an organization where everyone stands up on a Saturday to say, I actually helped Leeds get 3 points. I might be doing the accounts in the offices, or I might be the night security guard, but I made a difference to that.
I adore the story, the sand dune training. I think, am I right in thinking that was down to restriction, and that was basically, the money wasn't there and you couldn't afford to travel, therefore let's make the most of the natural landscape and what these guys have grown up in terms of terrain. I think it's a beautiful story.
Yeah, it is. Like my dad used to tell me stories when I was growing up of this Australian runner called Herb Elliott that had this crazy coach called Percy Cerruti, and he trained his athletes harder than probably they'd ever been trained, but he wanted to do it in beautiful surroundings. And he felt that those two almost had to work together. And so when I came to Fiji, I needed to find a solution to be able to train hard, create teamwork and togetherness, but with no money. And we had these Singatoka sand dunes that just are a World Heritage Site that we'd go up to early in the morning before the sand got too hot for our feet. And you'd see the smoke rising from the villages, and you see the Pacific on the other side, and you'd train ridiculously hard, but it's just the team there. And so everyone had that unity, and they were doing stuff together. And as a coach, you can just take yourself away from that, because they're a team trying to get up a sand dune and then back down one and up one. And it created all those things I talked about for psychological safety. And it's when that artistic way to look at training and sport meets that scientific, and the sand dunes are a great example of having that kind of perfect balance, I guess. This is, in my first early days, really, I travelled around and watched lots of tournaments, and there's this kid that was playing in this tournament called Jerry Tuwai, and when he had the ball in attack, it was all about fun, doing things outrageously. He had amazing footwork and vision. He was ridiculous. But when there was hard work to be done or had to defend, no chance. You wouldn't see him, hands in pockets, walking around, waiting for somebody to get the ball back to him so he could do his thing. And it was the same in training. So we'd be doing this stuff in the sand dunes because I got him into the national squad training. After seeing him, I could see that he wasn't the finished product, but he had something that no one else did. And we get sprinting these dunes, and when you come back to the bottom, there's a lot of bushes. And one of the times, he would be hiding in the bush and thinking that, he could perhaps I could ignore the fact that he was hiding there for a couple of runs and he'd get away with it. But you see his arm poking out and carry him, finish off the training session. And I took him then back. I said, right, let me drive you home and have a chat at Talanoa, they say in Fiji, with your mum and dad, just to see if we can help you become your best version, or in kind of words like that. And so I drove him back, and Jerry lived in a settlement in Suva, in the capital. So, it's not all sand and sunshine and coconut trees. A lot of the people in Fiji live in the interior in pretty poor areas, and there's not many dangerous parts of Fiji, but where he lived was one of those. And he lived in a place called Newtown. In fact, he played in the Olympic final, and after the Olympic final, a couple of German journalists interviewed him and said, it must have been a lot of fun to grow up playing with your mates on the beach with a coconut. And he took his shoes and socks off and showed all the scars on the bottom of his feet and said, I learned how to play rugby on a traffic roundabout. And we went to that traffic roundabout because his mum and dad's house is next to it, and it's 2 rooms. It was a corrugated shed. His mum and dad sleep in one room and everything else in the other room. And I don't think they had a long drop at the time, and they didn't have a generator, so no electricity, no running water in the house. And I saw his mum and dad and said, look, your son's super talented, but he doesn't understand about consistent behaviours, and we're never going to get the best out of him. He's not going to play for Fiji, and how can you help? And they said, well, when he was 13 or 14, I think he left school. He went to dive for fish in Bouva Bay, spear fish with his dad. They'd catch the fish and he'd sell them on the side of the road, early morning. And he'd go home when he'd sold the fish. And immediately, I thought, well, he's not afraid to work hard. That wasn't the problem. He hadn't connected the benefit of training to performing. And then his mum said when he was 16, he came and saw them and said, I want to be a rugby player. This is my dream. And his mum and dad didn't say, look, you've got to continue to do what you're doing and sell fish and provide for the rest of the family and your 5 brothers and sisters. They went without food, his mum and dad, for a week. They got the cheapest pair of football boots they could get in the only sports shop in Suva, in J.R. White's. They sat him down a week later. They gave him his left boot, said, this is your knife. They gave him his right boot and said, this is your fork, and said, this is what you're going to use to put food on the table for us. And then they backed his dream. They gave him his why, and he had knife and fork written underneath his boots when he played in the Olympic final. It was a massive moment for me because, immediately I understood what was really important and valuable for them, connected to their why, connected to the people around that I could then use to help him, get to the point that he would be self-sufficient. He needed to get some good habits. So I'd tell his mum and dad, exactly when training was, or exactly when he should be home, all those sort of things that I probably shouldn't be having to tell a 24-year-old to do. But it was to just get him to then become his best version. And I then did it almost the same, going around to all the other families and see them and find out what their different whys were, and to build that network of support, which was absolutely crucial, really, in our success. But people might forget what you say to them, but they won't forget how you make them feel.
I've seen this in New Zealand. Just what I spent about 7 months there. Not long after we first met, actually, I moved out there on quite a whim. Met a girl and just kind of did it.
Nice.
Instinctive decision. Had an incredible adventure, but I was blown away by just the love of rugby down there. But it speaks to something bigger, and you just hit upon it there. And I think we're seeing it to a degree at the moment during COVID. I've seen some people kind of bash on the fact that, football is still going on. But I think, be it football, be it creative pursuits, as human beings, we need that. We need the fun, and we need something that just takes us out of the severity of what life can be. And I think it's incredible that the nation pulled together in that way and willed your squad on.
I agree. I'm with you on that about the football at the moment as well. I get joy out of knowing that there's some time to be able to disappear off into watching a game for 90 minutes, and I think it really helps, and I think that helped Fiji in a very small way. You put everything into perspective. That there's far more important things than running around after a rugby ball. But if it can just for a moment, brief moment, just take someone away from what was a very difficult moment for a lot of the people's lives, where how they haven't got a house anymore because there's no house insurance in Fiji. The tidal wave swept into a lot of the coastal villages and meant that they couldn't farm on those fields for years because of the salt water. Yet they were pretty upbeat. They were like, well, it's all right, I'll go to another village where my cousin is. I'll live with them till I can start to build. We'll change what we're doing in the village, and then seeing other Fijians somewhere else. We were in Las Vegas, which was a very weird place to be, really, around that time, to go and then, win a world title over there. It did help people, I think, okay, we can get through this.
When I got to the bit in your story about, how everyone would go to the Olympic Village for X amount of time before the tournament, and yet you decided to take them to Chile, and then out to the Andes, where you said, I believe you said some of the players had never seen snow before, and just what a masterstroke to perpetuate the bonding and the fun and the thrill of the new.
Yeah, for us, it was a simple thing, really. I'd gone to the London Olympics as an observer because Team GB thought I would be the coach for the sevens team for Team GB. But I had been to some big events and I knew what it was like. And in Fiji, the pressure was being heaped on us. And I knew that if we went from there straight to the Olympic Village, it just would have even got worse. And we needed to take a collective breath somewhere together. So, I toured Chile as a player and had some contacts there. I guess it shows you also, like, when you go on tour to places and you make friends and you keep in touch with them, however many years later, that kind of came back to pay me forward, I suppose, and set all of that up in Chile. And then we went there and we really bonded tight for that last kind of assault and base camp, almost, really, in the Andes, until we went late into the Olympic Village with all of the distractions that an Olympics has, to go and do what we'd set out to do.
I was shocked. I shouldn't be shocked because of sponsorship and everything, but when you said there was a 24/7 McDonald's in there, that's interesting. But also, again, wonderful that you were able to create a culture of trust where you didn't have to watch your players sneaking in there, or which I believe you said that you did see other players from other teams doing that.
Oh yeah, well I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it in the book, but after about day 4 in the Olympics, there was a queue going round the corner and outside the McDonald's with international athletes and their coaches, and there was a notice on the door saying, because of that, we're limiting 20 items per person. This isn't Olympic Games, but half the people in a village or at Olympics are what I'd consider Olympic tourists. Their dream has been achieved by going to Olympic Games, and that's really, anything else is an added benefit. And that means there are so many distractions in an Olympic Village that you have to be tight as a group, and you have to also have a real alignment in what everyone's agreed, and you have to trust people massively that they're not going to dash off, because it wasn't just 24/7 McDonald's. Every single corridor had a Coke machine, dispensing machine as well, that just had unlimited Coke. You all had your own little fobs with that just activated your free drinks. And so the amount of people that I've seen both self-sabotage in an Olympic Games and just get things wrong in those last few days when they've committed 4 years of their life trying to get a medal is quite staggering, really. And again, it goes back to my principles. If you haven't got clear guidelines guardrails that everyone's agreed, and you're not actually treating people like adults, then you're going to get some derailers. And I've always believed that, don't treat anyone other. If you treat someone like an adult, you'll normally get an adult response. If you treat someone like a kid, well,
Yeah,
that's exactly what you'll get back. So
it almost sounds like the wheels were in motion from the moment you went on the as you described it, the base camp trip.
Yeah, I think when you get to those last moments, if my job as a coach, when any job I've done, I want to make myself redundant. I want to go to a big game and sit in the stand and have a beer, knowing that everybody knows what is required. They don't need you to tell them, where to go, who to pass to, who to tackle, when to go and have food, when to go and do your warm up, because they have that autonomy and they can run themselves. And that's kind of where we'd got to in those last few days in the Olympics. And I saw the opposite with lots of teams. People just think, more is more. And you think, my brain doesn't work like that. It's like, okay, if you're spending more time analysis with players, you're spending more meetings, you're spending more time telling them what to do. And then you think on the field, suddenly they'll become these independent thinkers. It just doesn't add up. So you have to take your ego away as a coach and go, look, enough's enough. And it got to a point where I go into the change rooms for the Olympic final. And this was the most viewed rugby match of any format ever in the world. It was on, I think 40% of 18 to 30-year-olds in the UK alone watched the sevens final, because it was, I think, it was like a Saturday evening at 10 o'clock in the evening. So it was quite a nice time for Europe. And I went in to do my speech, that you'd seen on any given Sunday and all that sort of stuff. And I practiced it and I was ready to give it some welly. And I just saw everyone was happy and having little conversations and positive body language. I thought, if I said anything now, it's just going to be for me. So I just said, good luck, have fun. And off I went. And then they put together, just an unbelievable, perfect performance in the Olympic final that won us the gold medal, first ever medal for a South Pacific island. But also, the IOC gave us the team performance of the Olympic Games, and then we went on to, back to bank holidays in Fiji, and my face on banknotes, and they gave me a waterfall, and the book got written, and a film's getting made.
I just think it's such a lesson there not to buy into the client name or the agency name or the prestige of a job. Again, it goes back to the illusion of success. It's almost, no, you're still being brought in to do exactly what you do well. So go out and do it in purity.
I agree. And I think, it definitely helps dealing with pressure if you feel like you've got competency. That overcompetence is what I want in all the players, where they feel they can do anything under any amount of pressure. But you don't want that overconfidence, and you don't want to create underconfidence either. And so if you get all of those things right, then I think when the pressure comes on, it does lift you up onto, and elevate you what you're doing. And if you haven't got all your ducks in a row, then it can push you down, and then suddenly you've got sub-performance. And that's it was a really important lesson for me, because I knew once we'd had everything done, we were well prepared, we'd done all we can. When the pressure came on, we did kind of feel like, okay, this is going to add to us. We're not going to feel it. And that's what happened.
Yeah. There was an expression that was wonderful, flick off the devil.
Yeah. We used a few, in Fiji, they love storytelling, it's particularly, in the evenings with a hot chocolate, sitting around a table, having chat and telling stories. And so I would thread in any of the things I really wanted them to own on the field into stories and into physical manifestations. So we'd have, if somebody was on the floor and knackered after, continuous passage of play, and they just want to have a few more seconds on the floor, because somebody else can probably make that tackle and no one's really going to notice. That's when you've got that devil on your shoulder. And so you had that physical movement where you'd get your hand and or someone would look at you and flick an imaginary devil off their shoulder to remind them that, like, all of that is temporary, just get on with it and don't listen to that ego, which is that little devil. And you can get on and do things. And we'd do those little things all the time as little physical cues that the boys would own that would help them. Yeah, that I never got involved as a coach to tell them to get off the floor or to run over there, because the players were managing it themselves.
I have to ask, so after, this is one of, I think on your book, what it says is one of the great sporting stories, which I 100% agree with. Was there an aspect of Frodo returning to Hobbiton afterwards? I just can't process how you come back from a story like that. Well, I can, but there must have been some reacclimatization going on.
Yeah, I think when we went back to Fiji, that it was all a blur. Then everyone was just super happy, and it really united the country. And that there have been problems. We've had coups based upon Indo-Fijians and indigenous Fijians and all sorts of things around that. And we had this beautiful unified country that. So that was just bliss really for that week. When I left, and I ended up working in New York with some basketball teams, and that suddenly it's like, you really do feel like what's going on. You also act a bit like a dick as well, because you've just won Olympic gold medal, you've achieved everything you want to. You feel like if you're not careful, that ego gets the better of you. You're untouchable. You are the soothsayer that's the fountain of all knowledge and all those sort of things. And you have to then go for this decompression where it's a bit depressing, really. I think for me, it's not about the medal. It's about the journey towards it. It's about everything like that. And after that, everything's kind of downhill. Mm-hmm. I just had a kind of a hiatus where I was in Fiji and just got dragged along with everyone being so happy. But then when I left, it kind of just gets you, and you do start to think, it's not going to, maybe it won't get any better than this. And this is as good as it gets. And you do have this big hole that can drag you down. You can then become, if you're not careful, a bad version of you again, go back to the material. New York wasn't a particularly great place for me to be then, because there's plenty of material stuff in New York. And then, you learn from that experience. And then next time, you achieve success, you manage that a lot better. So I definitely can see when people say, that there's a real drop in how they feel after winning something big. But no, I've got my hands full, and the pod's been fun, and this has been good. I've loved this, Ben. Thank you very much for having me on.